Hello, world. Welcome to the Speed Strength Show. I'm Tommy.
I'm Braden, and a bench is a long stool. It's actually the first time I said it out loud, and maybe it sounds bad to say long stool.
That was that was kind of the first. I had conflicting thoughts in my head. I was like, I know where he's going with
Yeah,
this. I wonder if he said this out loud before, or if it's only been contained in
yeah,
his head.
never.
Because you're
Yeah,
right. That could
just
be taken.
now that I'm hearing it.
That could be taken the wrong way.
Yeah, now that I'm hearing it. But okay, if you know what I mean by stool,
The seating structure.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. That's a clear way to say it.
Well,
Because got no
okay.
back.
Now I'm
So,
going to be in a dangerous spot where I go, what's the definition of a stool? Because
hmm
as we know, there's multiple definitions, but I'm referring to the seating device or structure or
hmm
whatever it is. Because a stool's for one person,
hmm
usually.
I mean, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
you
you
could
could say
stack
that.
people on top of each other, but they're not really designed for multiple people to sit on, as where a
Yeah,
bench
certainly not.
is.
Yeah,
So I
depending on the
wonder if
bench.
that's
Yeah.
included in the definition of what actually makes it that. In the same way, like couches have different names based on their seating capacity.
That's true. That's true. And now that I'm thinking about it, some benches. So my definition for a stool was it's like a single seater, and it has no supports essentially. Like there's no armrest, there's no backrest.
Yeah, I think the same thing.
Whereas and I would say for many benches that's correct. There's no armrest, there's no backrest. Most often I run into benches in the gym, so
That's my
those
problem
ones
too.
don't. But then now I'm remembering that park benches have armrests and a back, you know,
Well, that's what I
so
mean.
then
So
it
in
gets
our world,
tricky.
when we think of a bench, like when you say a bench, the first thing I think of is a flat bench that you use in the weight room to support yourself while you're lifting. Someone who
hmm
likes to go for strolls in the park, if you say bench to them, the first thing they probably think of is, yeah, that traditional bench with an armrest and a long backing where two or three people can
Mm,
sit down.
yeah,
And a park bench
that's
is for
true.
multiple people. A weightlifting bench, again, ideally should be for one person.
Yeah, I would say it's for one person at a time. If it's being used for like what it was built for. If it's
Yeah.
being used for seating, then multiple people is fine, obviously.
Well, not now.
Um, as we, well, yeah, definitely not
If
now.
you have two people sitting on a bench,
Definitely not now.
no can do. Doesn't work. Illegal.
Could be a really long bench or a really long stool, depending on your definition.
Oh. But yeah, I don't think they make 6 foot benches. So
Well,
in the
no,
gym, you should
not
probably
for
only,
gym use anyway.
yeah. So in the gym, you should probably not have two people. So the bench is a one person thing.
Yeah, maybe I don't even know if this is going to be. So I was as soon as I said it, I remembered the stool thing obviously, and then I remembered that benches have backs and armrests sometimes. But I thought maybe it's more accurate to say that stool to bench is equivalent chair to couch. But I don't even know if that's correct, you know? Because
From a
like you could
seating
I think you could
capacity, it
definitely
certainly
say,
is.
yeah,
Because a
but like I
chair
guess
and a
in terms of
stool
structure.
are clearly built for one person,
hmm
as where a couch and a bench can now. The intention was never to build. Well, I don't know, because now there's like, what about those single seater recliners? Is that technically a couch or is that a chair?
Mm, well,
I
that's
think
and
people
now we're getting
refer
into
to it as a
dangerous
couch because it
territory.
has the like the cushy
Yeah.
material to sit in,
Yeah.
but it technically is a chair because it seats one.
hmm Yeah, and because so I was thinking that this was going to be such an easy, clear thing, like chair, like couch is a long chair. I was thinking like that's clear, but now it's not. Now it's muddy. You know, this was this was dangerous territory to get in here. This is the first one I think that we. I mean, still think we agree, but I think that maybe we're not correct about this, or that I wasn't.
This is following a trend where whatever we bring up at the beginning, we quickly realize we do not have the necessary definitions or knowledge or background. We're not chair experts. I'm not anyway. I won't
That's
speak for
true.
you.
Yeah, I'm
But
not. I'm definitely not.
and it's so open to
Yeah.
interpretation, right? Like I said, you and me, the first thing
Oh
we
yeah.
think of when we hear bench is a flat bench with no other supports that you can do training, lifting, movements on. Someone who spends a
Hmm.
lot of time, like I said, at city parks or something like that, the first thing they think of when they hear a bench is what you described before. So it's, to me, it's so open to the interpretation of someone's experience where
Hmm.
they spend a lot of time. And that's the tricky part, I think.
Yeah. Maybe because we were just talking about like what are these things at the beginning? Are they icebreakers? Are they hot takes or whatever? Maybe they're just we make claims about things that we have no expertise in, and and pull at straws for 10 minutes.
I mean, it's thought provoking at the very least,
Yeah, it is. It is thought provoking. That's for sure.
because it would be boring, and maybe it is boring. I don't know, but I know for sure it would be boring if it just opened with a blank is a blank, and then one of us goes, "Yeah, I completely agree." Okay, moving on.
Hmm.
We're
Yeah.
better to
Well,
have
we don't
some
do
sort
that.
of
Yeah.
no, and that's kind of the good thing about this. So as much as is it a chair, is it a bench, is it a couch, is it a makes for conversation? Maybe not
Hmm.
interesting conversation, but it definitely fits the bill of random banter,
Which is
which is
really all that we've promised.
which exactly if you read the description, we promise you random banter.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, that's right. If you read it, you probably didn't. Maybe some of you don't know how to read, and that's fine.
but we did make a written it's not a promise, but we made a written, it's advertised that there
Yeah.
is random banter. And
Hmm.
to me, this qualifies as random banter.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say so. And at the very least, it's entertaining to us, which like that's the whole thing.
And it
That's what
puts
it's all
everyone in a
about.
good spot to start the show, right?
Yeah, who doesn't want to listen to a podcast that starts off with long stool? You know,
I'm going to
just
laugh
gonna
every
work it
time
in
you
as
say
many
that.
times as I can.
I'm going to laugh every time you say that. You say it with that
Yeah.
stupid grin on your face,
All right.
which makes it even harder not to laugh.
Yeah. All right. Um. Well, yeah. And the other thing too, I guess, just going back to like we don't just say this is this, moving on. This is what we're talking about. Our transitions are always much cleaner than that. Like
Yeah.
today, I could say, you know, stool is a or bench is a long stool. Now we're going to talk about torso training, but I didn't say that. We had this nice long banter, super clean transition that people probably aren't even noticing that they're in the middle of right now. And
They
then now we're going
didn't
to talk about torso training.
they didn't notice until you said it.
Yeah.
So,
I thought that was pretty good.
you know what? It probably is pretty good because now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know the exact song, but there is a song by Eminem where at one point he has whatever lyrics coming out. And then he's like, I don't think you realized until just now that I turned this one verse into the whole song.
Mm.
So if you're tapping into Eminem levels of creativity, that's
I definitely feel like I'm not doing that,
no, but
but
if
I
you were,
appreciate the comparison.
that's on a that's a different level of creativity.
Yeah,
So
that's fair. I'll have to listen to that song.
I I'm telling you, I don't know what the song is. So and he has a lot of stuff. So you might be listening for a while.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's
But
worse things to listen to.
that's that's fair.
Yeah. Now we're in danger of mixing the beginning and the end of the show.
Oh, I know. The danger zone. Here we go.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, at the end of that super clean transition, how do
Torso
you
training.
train your how do you train your torso? What is the torso? I guess we should start there.
Well, I mean, the torso is to me everything that kind of encompasses the spine or supports and allows the spine to move or resist movement. But I think it's really important to, like I said, torso is just the word I've adopted. And I know you bug me about it. I'm the only one who says torso. So I'm just going to stick with it now that you bug me about it. Um, but if I talk about torso or stability training, it's not just the spine, because I think the hips and the shoulders play a very important role as well. So to me, it's the spine, and then what's happening at the shoulders and what's happening at the hips. Because if you think of a lot of movements that we do, whether it's an upper arm action or whether it's a lower body action, you're going to need some stability in the shoulders and the hips in order to do that movement as best as possible. So to me, it's all three of those things, and it's promoting stability and promoting coordination in and amongst those three areas to promote athletic movements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with you for sure. I think like if people like everyone besides, you definitely need to stick to your guns on this one because torso training is definitely what it is. Everyone else calls it core training, of course. And I think people maybe not as much in like the strength and conditioning world, but maybe in like the fitness world, people think of like core as like bottom of ribs to top of pelvis in that
Just abs,
region. Just abs, exactly.
like
Abs,
just
obliques.
abs. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and some obliques because you got to throw in those
Well,
twisting
yeah, you got to do
crunches.
your Russian twists, exactly. Your
Correct.
bicycle crunches. Yeah. Um, but I mean, aside from, like sit ups, kind of, I mean, most people who are doing sit ups, I think, are using a lot of hip flexors. So you can't even really say that one. Like curl ups, maybe. I don't know. Pretty much every core exercise, torso exercise, I'll say, needs either hip stability, shoulder stability, or both, or it's just not going to happen. And if you're talking about like core training or torso training for the purpose of stabilizing the spine, which I think in our world most people are talking about that function, then you're not going to have a stable spine without stable hips or without a stable shoulder. Like, yeah, I can't imagine what a squat would look like, especially like a low bar squat would look like if someone had the best core brace, but like zero lat tightness, zero lat activation. You know what I mean? It's just the bar would not, it would roll off their back. Their upper back would collapse. Like you wouldn't have a stable spine. You
Well, and
need the
that's even
shoulder to
a
stabilize that upper
paradox.
back.
Could you have a stable torso or abdomen region without lats being active and engaged?
Well, yeah, I don't think so. They
It,
attach so low.
yeah,
So yeah, but yeah, I mean, yeah, to especially for the T spine, like upper T spine area, you need stable shoulders for that, and for like the lower lumbar and like coccygeal sacral areas to stabilize that, you need the hips because it's right in the middle. So yeah, 100% on board with that torso definition for sure.
yeah. But I think it's just important for me to clarify because I am guilty of just referring to it as torso training because for whatever reason,
Mm-hmm.
that's the first thing that blurts into my head. But it's not just to isolate the spine. And that, like you said, a lot of the movements either incorporate stability at the shoulder or at the hip. And I mean, I would argue probably most of it is both.
I would say so. I would say so
And
as well.
that's an important part of what I do in this, what I refer to collectively as torso training or stability training.
Mm-hmm. So, how do you train your torso or your athletes' torsos or I don't know. Like I think it functions. It has a different in every sport. I think it has like the spine and stability function for the most part. But what that looks like differs big time between our sports and between other sports as well.
Yeah, and I think there's sort of two overarching schools of thought when it comes to, particularly when you're looking at the level of the spine. And it's, do you incorporate a form of training which promotes stability or anti movement drills and strategies? So, do you load the spine in a way where it has to resist moving in a certain direction or in a certain way? Or do you want to load the spine promoting movement qualities? Right? So, do you want the spine to move and flex and extend and go through different ranges of motion as you are performing some of these drills? And to me, those are sort of the two overarching themes. And some sports may need more of one, right? If you look at something like a lot of the strength sports, for example, powerlifting, strongman, weightlifting, they may be in different spinal positions, but you probably agree that you set up in the spinal position and you hold that position through the duration of the
Ideally,
movement. Yeah.
ideally, yeah.
So, I mean, even though a power lifter, for example, on bench might have a lot of extension, they're trying to set up and hold that extension. You don't want to be moving in and out as you're pressing the bar. Or on the opposite end, if a strong man goes to pick up an Atlas stone or something like that, they have the curvature, the flexion in their spine, but they're locked in and braced in that position, right? Versus other sports where there might be more dynamic or unpredictable things in nature and the spine is twisting and moving around. So something like basketball or hockey or football where you're stretching and reaching, or something like gymnastics where you're in
I was gonna say,
extreme ranges of motion. So I think there's sort of those two schools of thought in terms of how do you want to train those qualities. Do you want to do it more through a resisting movement approach or a promoting movement approach, or perhaps a combination of both?
yeah, I think most sports would benefit from a combination of both because I mean, as much as we want to, like, I think for sprinting, it's more of the former that you were talking about, where you want to be relatively, relatively rigid anyway, um, in terms of your spine stability. But as much as we want to be perfectly flat, well, perfectly flat in a lot of situations, but whatever the situation that you set up in that position, you want to maintain it as much as possible. But that's just not going to happen. You like not all the time. And I mean, like it's a lot easier to keep a flat back at a 50% deadlift than it is at a 100% deadlift. But even at that 50%, there's going to be a little bit of movement. And at that 100%, probably there's going to be a lot of movement, you know.
Or more so relatively to that 50%?
Yeah, more so anyway. Yeah. Um, so you've got to at least be comfortable or like tolerable to a level of movement and be able to, even with that level of movement, like have some stability, have a good amount of stability still. Because I mean, I think whenever we have that movement, it's your body either in strength sports most of the time trying to find stability because it doesn't have enough. In other sports, then it's probably more so just exploiting the range that you've given it. I think in sprinting that's more of the case because there's not um, as many forces like ripping you in and out of extension or in and out of like rotation. Um, it's just you allow for a certain amount of movement because you need to have like a good range of motion to go through your full stride and things like that. You know.
Yeah, and there is some, like, I would describe them as like figure eight, like oscillating movements of the hips and the shoulders, but it's very, very minor. And again, and that's like what you said, to take advantage of some of the range of motion that's there. But yeah, for the most part, you're trying to keep the spine and the hips aligned in a consistent position as you go through the run.
Yeah. So what does that look like? I don't even really know that much. Like, I know that you want to be tall, like your head, shoulders, and like midfoot is kind of stacked, like during your like stance phase of a sprint.
Yeah. So, I mean, the spine will stay neutral for the most part. So the actual position of the spine will change, as we talked about in the past, right? As you accelerate and then pick up to an upright running speed. I have to think back to like old math, and the spine will translate, I think is the right term, if you think about like moving shapes and stuff like that. So the spine will translate, but it will remain in a neutral position. And the hips are relatively neutral, but you'll have them tilted upward just a little bit, because if the pelvis dumps back in and the spine goes into a lot of extension, then that limits the ability to drive the knee. So you'll have almost a neutral spine with just a hint of like upward rotation to help
Like
let
posterior
the thigh
tilt.
Yes, a posterior tilt from the technical standpoint, to allow the thigh to come up better. But it's a lot closer to neutral than it is to like true, like full anterior or posterior pelvic tilt.
Right. And then like, and obviously because it's a single-sided movement in a way, you're going to have like the sides of your pelvis are rotating independently to an extent.
And that's what I mean by that, like oscillating figure eight.
Yeah.
And that's going to be matched a little bit up top by the
rib cage,
by
like
the shoulders.
opposites. Yeah.
Exactly. But there's a lot more stability than there is large ranges of motion. Right? Compared to, if you think the movement that somebody might go through in a basketball game to jump up and reach for a rebound, or, if you think of like the Odell Beckham catch, where he's just way back there trying to catch the ball, or a hockey player reaching as far forward as possible with the stick. You don't see that extreme type of movement, but there's, you could call them micro movements.
Yeah, for sure.
At either end of the spine.
I think, well, it's helpful in those examples that you're talking about. Most of the time, the athletes, like when you're jumping for a rebound or jumping to catch the ball, like when you catch it, you need to have like some force production to stabilize the catch. But as you're going through all of that extension, as you're moving, you don't need to be producing that much force. Like, you're pretty much relaxed, right? Whereas with sprinting, you are producing force kind of like pretty, like it's rapid and then relaxed. So like not all of the time, but like consistently,
But the body's under some sort of consistent force the whole time. Maybe not one side, but yeah, I get what you mean.
So you need like a core brace to be able to produce that force, but I don't imagine you're thinking about a core brace while you're running at all.
No,
No,
you're hoping if you're running down the track at full speed and you're thinking about something like that, you're probably at that point overthinking the run, which we know for any movement or performance, if you're overthinking it, it's not the best strategy.
Right. So then I guess that's kind of an interesting thing, is to like, you need to have it, you need to have it like quickly turn on, turn off. We learned from Stu, obviously, about the quick twitch dead bug as like a good way to kind of develop that skill in a way. Do you find it ever like difficult to teach that skill to sprinters, or is it just pretty innate most of the time?
That's a skill that I'll teach like later. I was actually going to talk maybe a little bit about this in terms of the skill of corp racing. And to me, that ability to produce a high level of force through rapid contraction relaxation in the limbs, for example, while the core or the torso stays quite braced, I think is a difficult thing for a lot of people to figure out. And if you don't have an idea of how to stabilize the spine and the hips and the shoulders, then it does become really difficult to do that. And it is stuff that I do. I love using exercises that feature rapid contraction, rapid relaxation, and switching between the two, because I do think it promotes that ability. Excuse me, really well. But that's something that to me happens later on once we've initially taught them how to brace, and teaching that skill not just through a like a bird dog or a dead bug or something like that, but if you look at like the kettlebell swing with the kime, where there's the pulse or the breaking of the handle at the top. um, I use the example, I forget what episode it was, but when we were talking about might have been the training progressions or training things, and you talked about, how do you do the hip bridge with some sort of a reactive component, but if you do that glute bridge with the quick switch,
Mhm.
right, the limb has to exchange quickly and be relaxed to move, but then stabilize as soon as it hits the ground to keep the hips in a good spot. So I like using those things a lot in training, but I don't know how effective they would be if the person doesn't have the base to begin with in terms of how to brace the spine, the hips, and the shoulders and things like that.
Yeah, that definitely needs to be the first one for sure. Is teaching proper bracing, and like what proper bracing means. I think it's pretty consistent. Like we talked about in one of the first few episodes about like the non-negotiables. I think it's pretty consistent what you need to be doing for the most part, but what it looks like is a little bit different. Like we talked about um, in in that same episode, we talked about feet flat, back flat for the squat, right? And what does a back flat mean changes a little bit. For like weightlifters, you're going to need to be in a little bit more extension because you need that upright torso, versus a powerlifter doesn't need that. So we're going to prioritize being a little bit more neutral most of the time. Um, so there is nuance there with the sport that you're choosing, of course. But that definitely needs to be the first place to learn how to stabilize the spine. But then, yeah, definitely learning how to, and I think there needs to be a step in between, um, most of the time anyway. Once you learn how to brace, and then learning how to move hips and shoulders independently of the spine. So stabilizing the spine, moving hips and shoulders, and then you can add weight, and then you can add speed. Things or like weight and speed are interchangeable. Um,
And probably
but that's
context
something.
dependent.
Yeah, absolutely. Like
Like
I,
it might be more beneficial for the athletes I work with to build some speed into that competency versus your athletes. It might be better to build some weight into it because they need to brace for higher loads.
yeah, 100%. I could care less how fast any of my athletes move.
As long as they can get to the squat stand,
That's all right.
all that matters.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they have a minute to complete the lift, so that's good enough. Um, but yeah, like it's super common for people to, even high level lifters, honestly, to have a very hard time. And the one that I see the most is extension in the squat. I've talked about that many times, where people don't really know how to bend their hips without extending their spine. And people, I think it's a lot easier in the shoulders to like keep the spine neutral to a point. But then if you need to go high overhead, especially if you've got like doing an overhead press, everybody's really extended in an overhead press. Well, most people, I'm not saying
Most part,
everybody,
yeah.
so it's with that, the more extreme positions, and then like more shoulder extension, right? Flexion, extension. I get that one mixed up all the time.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, then people are going to start compensating by letting the rib cage tip forward. So, but I definitely think that's a very valuable skill to learn if you're talking about like truly stabilizing the spine throughout the entire range, and like maintaining the position you set up in, then that's important, but it's not always necessary, as we've seen as well.
Where do you like to start with the like teaching somebody some of this bracing and this stability stuff?
Some of the bracing, I always go, I have a like a 3-step for powerlifting specific bracing. I have kind of a 3-step thing where um the first thing is neutral spine, like feeling what that feels like. So ribs down is a cue that I love to use. And depending on the person's sort of natural like curvature, someone that's more biased to like lumbar extension, I'll have them squeeze their glutes as well to kind of pull them into a little bit more of a neutral position. Well, obviously we want to be conscious of their natural structures. So you're not, everyone's neutral doesn't look the same necessarily. But find that neutral position first, and then already you've got a little bit of tension from pulling the ribs down. Number 2 is the big breath, pushing all the air down, pushing out, and like creating that intra-abdominal pressure that people talk about. Um, and being conscious of what's happening with your hips and your rib cage as you're doing that, because a lot of times people will let the rib cage pop up or let their hips tilt forward to like make more room, because it's easier to breathe that way. If you try to breathe keeping your ribs down and your shoulders pulled down, it's a lot harder.
It's like breathing through a straw.
Yeah, well, and
Like
that's
it's
another cue that I'll use, like, is
okay.
to, it helps to be forceful with your breath. That makes it easier to direct it, I find, anyway. um because if you just breathe with an open mouth, then it's going to go into your chest and you're going to open up, and you're not going to do what you want. um and then step 3 is basically just flex, lock everything down. um and yeah, Valsalva essentially. But yeah, that's what bracing looks like for me most of the time. I'm fortunate that most of the athletes I start working with are high level lifters already, so they've got a good sense of that. But even within powerlifting, like, most people are biased to like big chest, or squatting in a lot of extension chest up, those kinds of things, and focusing more on pushing out than they are on like making sure that they have a lot of pressure. I guess there's a difference. Um, and yeah, it can become problematic for some people. Um, there was one biomechanist that I heard speak about her getting into powerlifting and focusing on pushing out into her belt so much that bracing without a belt became pretty much impossible, because she didn't have anything to push against.
Or like that external feedback.
That was part of it, but then
Yeah,
also
no, but that's like it's the same way that some people have difficulty creating a lot of muscle tension without high load,
yeah, that's right.
because the load forces you to be tense, as the
That's
same
right.
way the belt would force you to
Hmm.
create that tension.
Yeah, that's right. But then it even went a step further beyond that, where um, I don't remember what the word is, but in pregnancy, like your abdomen can kind of like separate, just because of the, like, you need to make room, and
Yep.
because she had been focusing so much on expanding, that she was like more like that kind of thing was happening earlier, or she was more predisposed to that, um, because of how she learned to brace. Which, yeah, so there was those problems as well, and then she was able to counteract that during her pregnancy and after her pregnancy by learning how to brace properly. um, anyway, so yeah.
Do you use the big three a lot?
Yes, a
Okay.
lot, a
I
lot.
figured that's probably a common point for,
Yeah, I would say, yeah, like 95% of people are doing them like at least twice a week.
yeah.
um,
Do you like to use carries at all?
I do like carries. I don't program them as much as I would like to, just because of, you have a certain amount of slots available.
Yeah.
Um, But yeah, I like carries for sure. That kind of thing would be more of like an off season focus or like a deload focus, um, or people that just like to do them.
Hmm.
Um, but I like carries a lot for that hip stability, and even like upper back stability. You know, people if they have access to strongman stuff, I would love to have more of my athletes doing like yoke carries and stuff like that because yeah, there's nothing that's going to prepare you better in my opinion, for like a heavy like walking out a heavy squat, and just having that upper back stability and being comfortable underweight and being stable underweight. um, so yeah, definitely like carries. We use them a lot on deloads, and then in terms of the big three, bird dogs and side planks are pretty standard. In terms of curl ups, I'll do them a little bit differently. um, I won't do not the McGill curl up most of the time. um, I'll do sort of a modified curl up where you still have the one knee bent to keep the pelvis neutral, but you're focusing more on creating flexion in the spine, honestly, and like rolling forward. Not a crunch or not a sit up, but like I don't know, like the first part of that. And basically the cue is you're just like tucking your chin and pulling your ribs down and like essentially practicing the skill of pulling your ribs down. Um,
Yeah, in the same way you would under those heavy loads.
yeah, exactly. Like it's the exact same thing as you would do when you're setting up for a squat, but you are able to go through a little bit more range of motion. You don't move a lot, like you're still like your lumbar is still relatively neutral. Um, but I find that helps a lot to help cue the ribs down, strengthen that sort of movement because it is even under load. It is a movement. You're going from a little bit of extension to a neutral position.
Yeah, as you
Um,
lock it down.
yeah, and you have to kind of like pull against the extension that your erectors want to be creating to resist the forces of the bar. So it's yeah, I find that one to be very very helpful for a lot of people. Hmm. I imagine you use the big three a lot as well.
Yeah, I like the big three to teach people some of the cues. I also really I like the dead bug and the bird dog a lot because it when we talked about having the spinal stability and the coordinative aspect of moving the limbs, I like using the bird dog and the dead bug for those reasons as well. I've really started to use the carries a lot more though in the last 2 or 3 years, more and more to teach some of the positions because I find when you think about those some of the three cues, like in terms of that double chin or neck neutral position, shoulders back pocket, ribs front pocket. It's I find like a double arm or a farmer carry really helpful as an exercise to teach those cues to people. And so between those different movements, you can create a context where they understand what is meant by double chin, shoulders back pocket, ribs front pocket, or however I change the cue or the instruction based on like the person and their understanding and what makes sense for them. But I found myself using double arm farmer carries a lot more in that sort of teaching component of getting someone to understand what it means to brace. And then of course, then you can start to expand on all the different things. I've created a bit of a torso, we'll call it, torso training kind of progression or system that I like to move through. And once somebody has an understanding of bracing, that's when I like to, okay, can we in some ways isolate stability in the sagittal plane through anti-extension movements or anti-flexion movements? Can we create stability in the frontal plane through anti-lateral flexion? So suitcase holds, side planks, things like that. And then transverse plane. So anti-rotation, can somebody prevent a load or a force from twisting them or moving them left or right in a certain direction and challenging them in that way And then it allows you to get into later on any of those 2 or 3 dimensional exercises where you're dealing with multiple planes of movement or multiple planes that you have to resist movements. Then you can get into the chops, lifts, some of the weirder or different carries, right? Where you're, in a half rack position with a kettlebell or bottom up position with a kettlebell that causes a lot of different planes to need to kick in and help keep you in whatever position that it is that you're trying to use. So that's kind of the general progression that I follow. And then, like I said, there's always going to be some movements thrown into that. Maybe you do like half kneeling chops or lifts or something like that, but you're moving out of a half kneeling position to a standing split position. So the hips are moving up and down, or different things like that. Like there's too many possibilities to sit here and list them all. But as you mentioned, it's now, can you start to, do you have stability in the hips and the shoulders to keep the posture that you need? But now can you move a little bit? Can you walk or, step upstairs with a load as you're carrying it? Or can you move in and out of different positions in a chop or a carry or a lift or something like that as you're going through it, and you start to challenge yourself a little bit more in a 3-dimensional component. But yeah, the big 3, and like I said, the double arm farmer's carry or whatever you want to call it, big fan of using those for teaching the skill of bracing, because it's not just something we can take for granted. We do need to spend time with people on how to actually accomplish that.
Yeah, no, I really like that sort of idea behind the system where teach bracing, then kind of you're testing the strength or like the focus or the skill of your brace against like one dimensional forces, and then moving into multi-directional forces or one dimensional with movement and things like that. So yeah, I think that's awesome.
And then at the end, of
Also,
course, that's where you'd have, when we were talking before about the high load.
yeah, or the
So you're
speed.
doing super heavy carries of
Mhm.
some kind, where like you talked about, like a yoke bar or whatever that strongman device is, where they walk with it, or
Mhm.
or on the other end, we're adding the speed and that
Mhm.
snappiness to the movements. But unless you have the ability to brace the shoulders, spine, and hips in all those different planes and in a combination of planes, probably not a good idea to add a tremendous amount of load or speed to those movements, because you're probably not going to get out of it what you intend on anyway. So that would be sort of the far end of the spectrum.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And I like those different exercises to teach those skills as well. Like if I think about, um, like it's really easy for somebody to learn like shoulders back pocket in a squat position where they're open and extended, and like being an extension makes that skill a lot easier. Um, but it's a lot harder for them to learn the ribs down in that position because of course they are already extended. But having the like a carry position being a lot more neutral makes it a lot easier to feel that position, even like moving from a low bar to a high bar where the load's a little bit more forward and you don't need to be so extended to get into that position, makes it easier to practice that like ribs down and shoulders down position. um, and I actually just heard this. I was watching a kabuki strength video a couple weeks ago, and they talked about using the bird dog like for the purpose of developing that like shoulder movement, hip movement while maintaining spine stability as a skill, not just like a strength thing, which yeah, I thought was super smart. And if I think about the athletes that I know, like when they squat, don't maintain a super neutral, like a 100% neutral or super neutral spine, because they squat in a little bit more extension and it's been fine for them. So like we don't necessarily need to change it. They're the ones that are really bad at bird dogs as well. So it's interesting to see that kind of correlation where they haven't needed to develop that skill. So then you transfer to other exercises, they don't have that skill.
Well, and think about how messy somebody doing a bird dog or a dead bug for the first time can be.
Oh,
In
it's
terms of trying
brutal.
to figure out like, oh, moving here, do I do that? Or how many
Hmm.
times do people, when they do a dead bug, instead of leaving the arm that's not moving up tall, they move it down toward their hip because
Always.
their leg on the opposite side is moving down. So they want to move in unison, and
Yeah.
they
That's the other. It's
basically
just
all four limbs are doing something different.
yeah, it's a coordination thing at that point as well. So yeah,
Yeah. So, and again, so
that's
for
right.
me, that's why I love to have the bird dog and the dead bug in there in the beginning to teach some of
Hmm.
that, like you mentioned, that coordinative aspect,
Hmm.
because you're going to need it later on if you want to add the heavy load or the speed.
Yep.
You have to have that coordination as a second nature ability.
Hmm. Um, yeah, and for us, I don't really ever add heavy loads to, aside from like if I program. Uh, Sometimes people get really tired of doing bird dogs, so then I'll substitute in Palloff press or something like that. Um, so that obviously you can load up heavy enough, and they have more control over that sort of stuff. Um, but we don't really ever get heavy with the core stuff. It's more so like that's like your lighter working sets are where you need to be practicing. And I mean, the other thing is it's not like these are core specific drills, and in your main lifts and in your accessories you're working on other things, like the focus is other things, but they're also everything is a torso drill in a way, you know. um
You
and
get some of that specific loading, either in terms of absolute load or mass, or the speed of the movement, like you mentioned in some of the activities.
mhm,
Like if you go to squat 600 pounds, there's an element of bracing and stability that you're getting out of stabilizing 600 pounds. Or if you're sprinting or changing direction or doing agility stuff, there's a speed component in terms of, are you able to keep that stability as you do fast, rapid action? So you absolutely are right in that there's crossover into other areas as well.
yeah, 100%. Like there's no better way to practice bracing a 600-pound squat than to brace a 600-pound squat. Obviously this other stuff is important and helpful to develop the skills like we talked about with like exercise selection. You know, you're developing the skills necessary for your sport. um, so the load component comes in with the movements that we're trying to progress. um, the lighter, especially the lighter competition lift days provide or like some of the variations like I've talked about in that same episode. If someone struggles with their bracing, then doing a tempo kind of a lift gives them more time to focus on it, keeps the load lighter so they have more capacity to focus on it, and then it also just like you have to do it longer so you get more of a stimulus out of it as well. um, so it's more so that's where the load, like we don't do whatever the equivalent of a quick twitch dead bug is in terms of load. Like we don't do any maximal effort dead bugs or anything like that. um, the other thing though that we will do on deload weeks, because we don't need that speed component, we do need a little bit of the movement component. um, because like I said, you are going to probably go into some extension in a max effort squat, you're going to go into some flexion on a max effort deadlift. I mean, everyone's got a little bit of rotation here or there because nobody's perfectly symmetrical.
No, not even close.
And you need to be able to tolerate those positions and even be like strong in those positions, or else a tiny misgroove is going to throw off your entire lift, and potentially injure you. So that's another thing that we'll do on deload weeks, because I don't think you need to be doing this stuff all the time. But things like hanging leg raises, or like side bends, or like a power off press with a rotation, um,
Yeah, or you
to
brace and then move and come back,
yeah,
something like that.
exactly,
Yeah.
to control yourself. Like and they're not super extreme positions. Like I'm not suggesting people like put a bar on their back and just go through like flexion extension movements. Like
Please don't do that.
doing a hanging leg raise, like you're as minimally loading that position as possible while going through a little bit of flexion, and the rotations. Yeah, it's slow, it's controlled, but then you're teaching yourself to move through rotation or move through flexion or move through side flexion, and be stable and like strong enough in those positions that you can at least tolerate it. So
Yeah, when you bring up the heavy loading, I would like to experiment more with heavy loaded stability and torso type work. The thing that I find difficult is, well, I know somebody at Mac who tried that, and then what they found is oftentimes we program this, like you said, in a deload week or in low intensity days that are used in between really high intensity or important training sessions. And what he was explaining to me that he found was that the neural demand or the load just becomes so high that all of a sudden this lower intensity day no longer is just that. So then you decide, if I'm going to do like a front plank with a ton of weight, or if I'm going to do super heavy carries of some kind, or extremely heavy loaded Turkish get-ups or something like that, now you need to justify moving them into your higher intensity days because of the load is going to be that much higher. So that's been the difficult part for me, is I'd love to play around with that and experiment with it and see sort of what the outcome is. But then I have difficulty again, and this might be because of my minimalist or essentials only type nature on programming for the big days. But then I'm going, can we justify replacing something that we've deemed to be the most important for those athletes on one of those big days? And that's the kind of the conundrum I end up in. But I would like to, maybe I'll just do it myself. I'll try it on myself and see what happens. But I would like to try to experiment with some of that to see what the outcomes could be, because there might be, like, I've never done it with anybody before. So what are the benefits? What do you see? Do they come back stronger as a result? Because then they're prepared to brace for heavier. Like, I don't know. So I would like to experiment with it, but that's the conundrum that I have, is does it replace what you've already deemed to be most important in terms of training for those athletes to then justify putting in on a higher intensity day?
yeah, well, that's kind of the thing. Like I was mentioning before, like I would like to do more carries and stuff like that, but it's just it takes a slot. You only have limited time. You have limited recovery capacity. Um, and I mean, yeah, to your point, like doing heavy holds, that is something that people do in powerlifting. Not like, I wouldn't say everybody does it, but there is a not insignificant portion of people that I think do it. Um, for like a heavy, like you just unrack a heavy bench, like super max heavy bench, and you just hold it for
Oh,
10
hold it and
seconds,
brace. Yeah. And
rack
then,
it again. Yeah. And same kind of like you walk out a super max squat, hold it 10 seconds, walk it back in. I think some people use it as more like a mental thing, to understand
it's
what
going to feel
does,
like,
yeah, like especially if you're going into a competition where like maybe this is a record that I have my sights on. And so assuming the first two attempts go well, this is the weight that I'm lifting. It's not like I'm lifting whatever's in the tank, I'm lifting this. So then maybe you're doing your super max holds with that weight so that you know what it feels like. Um, but I think it is also really beneficial for like a bracing, for like a neural drive. I think it would be really beneficial for your athletes for a neural drive standpoint. I know,
well, and that's where I've
it,
thought about, do you use it in more general prep
and that's
where it
kind of
doesn't
what
matter
I'm.
what you're doing? But then the problem I run into is, then are they still ready? Are they ready yet for those heavy loads? Regardless, whether it's in the form of heavy squatting or heavy something else, a general prep phase might not be the right place to load them up at.
Well, I
It,
mean,
it like I said, I'd like to play around with it at some point, but I'm
yeah, I,
struggling to decide where it fits.
I do think, I mean, I think if they have a good understanding of bracing, because the other thing is like, it's not like they're extreme positions, you
No,
know, and I don't, like, I believe that there is benefit from like for powerlifting to like walk out a heavy squat and just practice your brace super hard. Um, and same thing with bench, to kind of develop that skill and like a neural drive standpoint. Um, but the other thing for powerlifting is like it's easiest to brace for your squat at the top. It's easier to brace for your deadlift at the top. So, are you actually getting benefits in terms of bracing? Neural drive, I 100% agree with that. In terms of bracing, I'm not sure because
the
for
demand's not as high.
yeah, like for 95% of people, I see them brace super, super well at the top. And then as soon as they move their hips, their spine is extending, So exactly. And like, so then are you just, you're improving the thing that's already really good, you know? I don't know. It's like if you I talked about in the exercise selection and like weakness assessment, if someone has a good morning squat where they shift back to their hips, is doing good mornings and just strengthening that position actually going to make them better at squatting? Like maybe a little bit, but maybe work on the thing that they actually suck at, you know?
Yeah.
So it's hard to say, but I do think it's something that could be beneficial. And the other thing that I have an issue with is because you always need to be doing the thing, like prioritizing the thing that's most important, right?
Does it
So,
ever actually become the most important?
well, and because I believe it's valuable, but is it valuable enough?
Exactly.
Because it also, it's not, it's valuable, but it also takes away from other things,
That's what I mean.
you know?
And
Like if
that's
you
the
do
part
it,
I've been struggling with.
yeah, like if you do it before, like if you do a heavy squat walkout before your squats, do your squats go worse for that? Do they go better for that? Maybe. I don't know. Do you
Yeah.
do it after your squats and then you're just bagged for the rest of your workout? You can't, from a like workout structure standpoint, you can't justify squatting, do everything else, and then heavy holds at the end to like load a bar up to super max. You can't, especially with COVID and you have like limited time in your bookings, like you can't justify that now. So
Yeah. That's the,
it's interesting.
that, yeah. And like, so like I said, that's the conundrum I have in terms of
Hmm.
like, how do you choose it or what do you do? But
Hmm. One more thing I will say on that is my chiropractor, he's like a baseball guy and he does S&C stuff for a lot of baseball players and like pitchers in particular.
okay.
So they're obviously more speed athletes and they need to maintain their mobility as well.
Oh man, the
So
speed on the arm as they're
exactly,
ripping a fastball, fast,
exactly.
very
So
fast.
the he does max strength stuff with him, but it is in this line where you walk out a max squat, hold it, walk it back in, you unrack a max bench, and then re-rack it, and you're not going through the range because that kind of thing. I mean, they're not prepared for those positions probably, um, and especially like you don't like pitchers don't need to be bench pressing. You don't need a lot of strength through that whole range. It's part of the strength speed
Continuum.
continuum. So it's going to help you like just ramp up your nervous system and that's why he uses it. So I fully believe that there would be merit for you um, if you could find a way to slot it in that didn't
I'll
take away
find a
from
way
too
at
many.
some point. This
Yeah.
conversation has encouraged me now to like take that from a thought in the back of my mind
Yeah. Give
and
it a shot.
make it happen.
Hmm.
But you know, it's not a conundrum. I don't know if it's ever been a conundrum for me personally. Is what to pick for the music when
Mm.
you go to work out or work. I find that's not really a conundrum. Did you have any conundrums this week trying to decide on what to listen to?
I no, I didn't. Sometimes I do. I'll be honest. Sometimes it is a conundrum,
Well, you have a
but
greater range of musical interests than I do. So I
yeah,
could see you having more options to pick from and then having to weigh up more decisions compared to me.
yeah. Sometimes there's so many options that none of them are really that exciting. But I've been on that K-pop train. I'm still there, man.
You still haven't got off.
I'm heavy in it, dude. It's so cool. It's so good. all the same songs. Just watch. I'm watching more of the music videos I'm actually watching instead of just listening now. So yeah,
So it's
I
way
mean,
more of a commitment then, because it's not just music playing as you do something else. You have to
yeah,
dedicate
like sometimes
time
like
and
whole
attention to what's happening.
yeah, like I'm doing my work and then sometimes yeah, like a song will come on. I was like, oh yeah, I really like that music video. I'll just stop doing my work for a second. 4 minutes, I'm locked in here. It's not great. It's not great for productivity, but it's a lot of fun.
Hey, it puts you in a
So
good spot. And that's the
it
most important
does.
thing, right?
It does, and it gets me excited in the gym, gets me pumped up for work. Yeah, so it's hard to feel bad when listening to K-pop, honestly, and unless you hate it. I mean, I'm not. If you hate it, then don't listen to it. But it's nice.
But if you haven't listened to it, then you don't really know. So you do have to give it a fair chance.
Yeah, you give it a fair chance.
I've never listened to K-pop, so I would have to give it a fair chance.
Yeah, you don't strike me as the kind of guy that would like it, but you never
I
know.
I do have some interesting things that I like to listen to though, so you never know.
You never know. That's
I
right,
won't judge it until I listen to it. I
and that's
won't make
fair.
up my mind.
That's good. That's a healthy attitude to have, I think.
I think so.
Yeah. What have you been listening to this week?
Just still heavy stuff.
Oh, of
Still
course.
heavy stuff. So
Yeah.
I had a little bit more kind of old school, some of the old school thrash metal from back in the 80s in California, the Metallica, Megadeth, Exodus, Testament, all the old school stuff from sort of that Bay Area thrash influence. So
Mm.
some of the stuff that, arguably is foundational, some of the most important music that was created in the metal genre that, you know, provided influence or a stepping stone for bands moving forward. But yeah,
Mm.
that old school stuff.
The Bay Area is in like San Francisco, Oakland,
Yeah.
kind of interesting.
Because I
Interesting. I didn't
think,
know that.
don't quote me on this. I know like Metallica's from the Bay Area, and Dave Mustaine, who was in Metallica for a time, but then started his own band, Megadeth, when he got kicked out, is from the Bay Area. And I think Exodus and Testament are from the Bay Area as well. Not sure where Overkill is from. They might be East Coast. Not sure. Pretty sure Slayer's from the Bay Area or somewhere in there as well. So yeah, all that kind of old school, like, you know what, just to play it safe, old school American thrash metal, because I might
Nice.
not be 100% sure on the States. So, but old school, yeah, old school American thrash metal. Good
Hmm.
stuff.
Yeah.
So,
Interesting. Big music towns over there, I guess. A lot of rap and hip hop stuff came out of there too. So
yeah, I mean, well, you might even like some Anthrax is from the East Coast, but they
mm,
play similar stuff to, they were part of that like thrash metal wave,
mm.
but they did some collaboration with Public Enemy, who you may have heard
Okay.
of.
Yeah, yeah, I have.
In the
Yes.
90s. And did you know Ice-T had a metal band
I did
called
not.
Body Count?
I did not know that.
And he's
That's
a
crazy.
California guy, right?
I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me. I don't know. I feel like he's probably older than Ice Cube, I would say.
I think so, but I think he's a California guy. But he had a metal band, so if they might have been based out of Cali as
Yeah.
well. But yeah, it's good stuff,
Interesting.
man. I like it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I
old
have
school
not
American thrash
listened to
metal.
I've not listened to any of Ice-T's music, just his I know him from Law and Order. That's it. That's
Like I
it.
said, I only know some of his stuff because he had a metal band project,
That's crazy.
and I think they were still making stuff as of like within the last few years.
Oh wow.
So
Hmm.
because he's a big fan of that. He seems to like music just in general.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so old school American thrash was a lot of what I had going
Very
this week.
nice. Very nice.
I
Look
had
at
to
us
lift heavy metal. So
being cultured and internationally.
I don't know if, I mean, States is technically international, but not that far
Yeah.
away from us. But yeah, so it was
Yeah.
good. Can't complain.
Yeah. Good stuff, man. Well, then I think that wraps up torso training.
Episode, who knows,
Well,
whatever number we're on now. I forget.
yeah.
I
Hard to
forget.
say. Yep. But yeah, as always, if we got anything wrong or right, maybe you know the definition of stools and benches and or
The
cheese.
structural definition.
Yeah. Or if you have ideas of what we should be talking about or questions or whatever, then hit us up on Instagram, Speed Strength Show for the show, Speed Strength Performance for Thomas, Braden Southern for me. Um, yeah, thanks for coming along, world. That was the Speed Strength Show.
And we will see you next week.
Peace.